Okay, let's get started. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the second Sunday brunch of the spring semester. I'm Ashley Walters. I'm an assistant professor of Jewish studies here at the College of Charleston, and I also direct the Pearlstein-Lipoff Center for Southern Jewish Culture. Today's event is sponsored by the Pearlstein-Lipoff Center for Southern Jewish Culture, as well as the Jewish Historical Society of South Carolina. I'd like to thank Kim Browdy, Associate Director for Community Relations for the Jewish Studies program. Kim, as well as several of our students who I think are still in the lobby, get here very early in the morning to set up for this brunch and get the coffee going. So we wouldn't be here if it weren't for their hard work every Sunday. So before I introduce our special guests, I did want to say that we do have a number of exciting events coming up. On Wednesday, February 21st, we will be hosting Roots, a local Palestinian-Israeli initiative for understanding nonviolence and transformation. This event will take place here in Arnold Hall at 6 p.m. The following night, on Thursday, February 22nd, we will be hosting Rabbi Tamar Manasseh. This woman is so incredibly inspiring that she's had not one but two documentary films made about her and her life and the work she does as a Black rabbi fighting gun violence in Chicago. So there will be a screening for the new documentary film about her and her work, and then she will join us for a conversation, as well as we'll also be joined by the filmmaker Brad Rothschild. And this will take place at the Terrace Theater on February 22nd at 6 p.m. And this event will kick off a whole slew of other events, other films that will be featured through Charleston Jewish Film Fest. And then I did want to mention, in addition to many other events, we do have one more Sunday brunch this semester. On Sunday, April 14th at 10 a.m., the Zucker Goldberg Center for Holocaust Studies will offer its annual Nemirov Lecture featuring renowned Holocaust historian Wolf Gruner, who will talk about his latest book, Resistors, How Ordinary Jews Fought Persecution in Hitler's Germany. If you'd like to check out all of our events, you can visit the events page on our Jewish Studies website, follow us on Facebook, or you can grab a newsletter on your way out the door, or better yet, do all three of those things. Because we have Rachel and Lyssa here today, I did want to share a bit about the upcoming JHSSC meeting in May. This spring's meeting is really quite special. It's going to be focused on the Jews of Kalushin, Poland, that migrated to Charleston and went on to form what is known as a Landsmannschaft, a fraternal organization of Jews hailing from the same hometown or region in Eastern Europe. My colleague Chad Gibbs, an undergraduate research assistant, Leah Davenport, and I have been researching this community for about a year now, and I can assure you it's going to be a lot of fun bringing us all together, as well as descendants of those who were original members of this community together here in Charleston. So if you're interested, you can certainly speak with me or Rachel. You can go to the JHSSC website and find out how to register for the event there. Okay. So now the moment you've all been waiting for. So the plan for today is that I'm going to turn over the mic to Rachel and Lyssa, and they're going to talk about this wonderful, wonderful book. Then what we'll do is, once they've had their time with the mic, we will open the floor up to questions. If you're joining us on Zoom and you'd like to ask a question, please type your question in the chat box, and we'll be sure to read your question aloud. After the event, we will have a representative from the bookstore here with copies of the book to sell. I will say we have a limited number, so if you are unable to get a copy of the book, there are nameplates that Rachel and Lyssa can sign, so that when you do get a copy of the book, you can put the plate in there and have a little autograph in the book. Okay, so I'm very excited to introduce our guest speakers today. Rachel Gordin Barnett and Lyssa Kligman Harvey have an interest in all things Southern, Jewish, and historical, including foodways. They are natives of South Carolina. Rachel hails from a small town, Somerton, South Carolina, and Lyssa from Columbia, South Carolina. They live in Columbia and have been instrumental in preserving Jewish history across the state. They are founding members of the historic Columbia Jewish Heritage initiative, and they created the Kugels and Collards blog to preserve and share Columbia's Jewish history by collecting food stories, recipes, and photographs in a digital venue. Rachel is a past president and current executive director of the Jewish Historical Society of South Carolina. Her many public history projects, from the Jewish Merchants Project to the Jewish Cemeteries Project, have truly enriched our understanding of South Carolina and its rich Jewish history in innumerable ways. Lyssa is a teacher, a therapist, and an artist. Her life work has been dedicated to helping children and impacting her community by creating the Columbia Holocaust Education Commission, the Jewish Cultural Arts, and serving on arts and environmental boards. And at some point today, we are going to welcome our third guest speaker to share a bit about her family story. Mickey Kronsberg Rosenblum is the Vice President of Membership for the JHSSC and a longtime member. She's very active in the community and contributed a fabulous story to the book, so we're really excited to hear from her. So please join me in welcoming our guest speakers today.
Thank you, Ashley. And it's so good to see such a big crowd today. Thank you all for coming out. I guess everybody likes food. First, I want to recognize Ashley for pulling this together. Thank you, Kim. Yaron is here. Thank you, Yaron, wherever you are. And let me recognize a few of my board members. Jeffrey Rosenblum is here. He's a past president. Ann Hellman is past president, and her husband, Max, is with her. And Mickey is, like she said, our current chair of membership. So if you're not a member of JHSSC, you can see Mickey or go to our website. So that's my plug for the society. So Kugels and Collards. About 2016, I'm going to talk a little bit about how it came to be, and then Lyssa's going to talk about the Southern Jewish table. So this is how we're going to roll. And then we're going to ask all of you, you can share, because it occurred to me as I'm sitting here, we're going to tell you stories about Jewish South Carolina, but you all know these stories, and you have these stories in your family. So you have to remember, Kugels and Collards is a snapshot. It's 60 family stories and 80 recipes, and it is only a small portion of South Carolina. I am sure all of you can relate. But back in 2016, Historic Columbia decided to begin an initiative called the Jewish Heritage Initiative. Lyssa and I were both volunteers on the committee, and we ended up doing a fabulous job with oral histories and markers and walking tours and all of those great things that you would put into developing a history. But Lyssa and I are both foodies, and we thought, gee, let's try something different. And let's ask people what the best thing they remember their mother or their grandmother making, and talk about their food memories and talk about family history in a different way that would engage people. And we started Kugels and Collards. Well, at lunch one day, Lyssa said, Kugels and Collards and Knishes. And I said, well, that's good, but that's a mouthful. So we pulled it back. Kugel being the Jewish, obviously, that recipe that we all probably have in our repertoire, and the Collards being Southern, the Southern part of this, hence the Southern Jewish table. So we collected stories. We asked people to write in. We asked for recipes. It's amazing how many recipes are not written down. That's another story as we developed the book. And we kept going. About 2 years into it, we heard from USC Press asking if we'd be willing to take it statewide. I don't know if any of you, I know Ashley and Yaron and folks have worked with academic presses. It is a long process. So we went through the process, and in the meantime, when we signed the contract was the month that we actually went into COVID lockdown, which is what we did for 2 years during when everybody else was, trying to figure out how to bake bread or whatever you were doing. We were collecting stories. We were talking to people on Zoom. We were sending emails. I made a pitch every time we had a Jewish Historical Society, one of our wonderful Zoom conversation programs, which many of you, I hope, had tuned in. And we collected amazing stories. The silver lining was we were able to reach people that had grown up in South Carolina but had moved out of state. And so we would hear from folks. I have folks that reached us from Boston and from, D.C. and other places like that we normally would not have gotten had we hit the road just traveling the state, which is our original intent. We gathered up all these stories and we started writing. And 4 years into all of this, we are very proud to say that we now have Kugels and Collards, and it has been very well received. We have done press across the country, lots of podcasts, and it's very interesting. We have had young podcasters contact us a lot from the West Coast. First question is, are Jews in South Carolina? I have to explain our history, of course, that we have a very rich and deep history in our state. And, you know, for a gal that grew up in a small town, I mean, eating brisket and having collards and brisket and kugel and all that on the same table was just normal. I mean, that was the way we grew up. Apparently it's not. It is exotic. So that's why I think, you know, this has opened the eyes of many to what a Southern Jewish table is. Of course, Marcy Cohn Ferris, who writes the introduction to our book, started doing the research and has done incredible work on the Southern Jewish table. I think what we did with this, we personalized it. We went to contributors across the state and asked them to give us their story. And we've asked people to keep it in their words, their family, their recipes. And I think I'm so grateful to all those folks who took the time and were willing to contribute their stories, recipes, and family pictures. The book has beautiful family pictures, as well as some really lovely, I'm going to say lovely, but I think they're wonderful food pictures. Lyssa and myself and a couple of our dear friends got in the kitchen and cooked for weeks to do the photo shoot. We hired a wonderful food photographer who was professional at this. So that is the backstory to Kugels and Collards. I hope if you don't have a copy, I hope you'll pick one up today. Just want you to know that all the proceeds come to the Jewish Historical Society and to Historic Columbia. This has been a labor of love for us, and we've been friends for years. Our grandparents, actually, her grandfather signed my grandmother's immigration, her naturalization papers, so we didn't even know that. I just found the document. So, you know, it's Jewish South Carolina. What can I tell you? You know, if we dig deep enough, we're going to find we're all related, right? So I'm going to turn over to Lyssa. We're going to talk about what is a Southern Jewish table, and what makes it, and how did it come to be, Lyssa?
So, unmute. All right, is this good? Okay. I have a big voice. I'm the oldest of 5 and a little bossy, so I have a big voice. I'm Lyssa Kligman Harvey. My maternal grandparents are from Charleston. They're the fire tags. And so I grew up, my childhood, I grew up in Charleston. In fact, I remember crying on the way home. I love Charleston so much. And now I have grandchildren who here, and I get to come, and I still cry when I go home to Charleston down I-26. My paternal grandparents are from Columbia, and but originally they came from Poland and Russia, and settled in Estill. My grandfather in 1929 went to Estill, South Carolina, and my grandmother went to Kershaw County, and they met and moved to Columbia eventually with dry goods stores and grocery stores. I grew up, y'all, like with a wonderful childhood. First of all, let me just say this. And my mother was a great cook. She was a Busta, and my father loved her food. I mean, and so she put on the table whatever he liked and what she adored. You know, we ate everything. And I knew that when I visited my grandmother Mildred on Duncan Avenue near right 2 streets over from St. Margaret, that they had a kosher kitchen. And in her kitchen was Annie Gilliard. And Annie was employed by my grandparents all the way back from St. Philip Street. Now, the fire tags lived on St. Philip Street along with plenty of probably your your relatives or you or your parents, our aunts and uncles. I know they lived with the Krells on one floor, and oh my goodness, there was somebody else I can't remember. And the Firetags were on the other floor. But next door to them was were the Gilliards. And Annie, my grandfather worked in the store all the time, and to tell you the truth, I don't really think my grandmother did very much, but when she did, Annie Gilliard came over and was employed, and she cooked, and she loved to cook. Well, as you know, Eastern European food, kugel, brisket, rugal, everything you ate out there, is brown. We are lucky enough in South Carolina to be surrounded by beautiful fields and rich dirt and lovely oceans and back creeks. Well, Annie was taught to keep a kosher kitchen, and in turn, she brought to the table, and I think to me, when I started thinking about the Southern Jewish table, for me, this was the heart of it. She brought those beautiful tomatoes, okra, corn, all those fresh vegetables, and she made this awesome okra gumbo. Now it's more like a succotash. Now you know that enslaved Africans did bring those beautiful vegetables and seeds and rice to the South, and so we were lucky enough to have those. But Annie, was taught by her mother and probably grandparents as well how to use it. We didn't know from that, so. She kept kosher, but she would bring over okra gumbo. And I wanted to read you something from a chapter in the book that's called Southern Roots. There are 6 chapters in the book, and they talk about just the foodways, mothers and grandmothers, let's see, I have to look at, you'll see when you see it, but this is Southern Roots. So, let's see. Annie shared her recipe for okra gumbo with my Aunt Linda Firetag Denberg, who lots of you know, and she subsequently shared it with me. Let's see. Okay. I just don't need to read all this. After leaving home, my Aunt Linda said she didn't know how to cook. But this recipe was one of several that Annie later shared with her because she loved it. The texture, if you think about it, and the onions, it's just a really good flavor. Like many great cooks, Annie cooked by taste, and so none of her recipes were written down. So Linda and Rachel and I had to kind of come together and write what I remember and what Linda remembered was Annie's recipe for okra gumbo. For our family, she kept the dish kosher, okay, which meant no bacon or bacon grease because that's how she would cook it. Instead, she uses vegetable oil to saute the vegetables. Now, I'll tell you what I do. She used vegetable oil. I use a little vegetable oil, and I caramelize the onions first. Sometimes I throw in a little schmaltz. So there you go. Kugels and Collards right there in the okra gumbo. She used vegetable oil. She might have made this gumbo for her own family, but a little differently. Although traditional gumbos have a roux base, Annie's recipe is more like a succotash, but she and our family always called it okra gumbo. Linda used to make this recipe, she still does if we ask her, for the Friday night Sabbath meal, and it's still a family favorite. I'm really excited about serving this passed down, told recipe for our Thanksgiving meal. I host the Thanksgiving, so I serve it. I hope it lives up to Annie and Linda's long-loved recipe. Now, I know you all have examples. I'm going to tell you one more about my grandfather Joe, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mickey because she's got a really interesting story as well. A little different because she doesn't hail from South Carolina, but she is now. I mean, you're a long-time South Carolinian. You were born here. Oh, your mother moved here. Your mother wasn't in South Carolina. My bad. Okay, sorry. My grandfather Joe, in the I guess 40s, bought a beach house in Sullivan's Island. He loved. I wish Eli was here. Yeah, that's my first cousin. He loved to take us crabbing. Now, my booby, may she rest in peace, Rebecca Resnick. She would never, ever, uh, even she. I don't. She didn't even know from shellfish. You know, she didn't know shrimp or crabs. But we knew that she knew that it wasn't kosher. So nothing like that was ever allowed at the beach house. But my grandfather Joe, we would take a walk. We'd walk and we'd crab and we'd bring them back to the house. And he made a big old fire, like a a campfire. Put a pot on it, boil the water, and put those crabs in, and we would sit on the back steps and pick those crabs. And that was our kind of, not letting in the house under the eyes of Booby. And to this day, we still won't do it. We'll eat crabs or shrimp on the side porch. Kind of come in the house the back way. And you probably have stories like that, right? And I'd love to hear them in just a minute. Nikki, tell us about your mother who was not born in South Carolina, but tell us about your mother and your story. I thought we were so lucky to gather stories, and we love Mickey's, and it's a different recipe as well. So I'm gonna turn it over.
Is this working? Okay. So my story is different, and Rachel. The reason I'm here is I can't turn Rachel down. Rachel asks me to do all kinds of things, and I say, "Okay, Rachel, I'll do it." So we were just talking one day, and I said, "I just finished my mother's cookbook." So I myself had tried to gather some of her recipes and made a little cookbook, which I'll show you when I'm done. But anyway, so my parents are not from Charleston. My dad grew up, believe it or not, on a little island called Tillman's Island. It's on the Chesapeake. My grandmother moved there at the turn at what was it, 1903, and at the time there was no um, plumbing, electric, anything like that. It was pretty tough. But he grew up there. My grandmother kept kosher. She could only have fish because every now and then a boat would come from Baltimore with a chicken. But other than that, she cooked. Everything came out of the sea. My mother, on the other hand, grew up in Stanton, Virginia, small town in Virginia. My grandfather had a men's store that did very well. So my mother, her mother was from Germany, and she was a wonderful cook. But Mama had three older brothers. All of them went to college. And she said, "I'm going to college too." She graduated from high school at 16, and her dad would not let her go away. So she went to Mary Baldwin, which is in Stanton, for 2 years, and then transferred to Goucher. And this is where she met my dad, who had gone on a scholarship to Johns Hopkins. So they dated. Then Mama graduated and decided to go to work after she went to Marjorie Webster, which was where she got a secretarial degree. As you all know, there weren't a lot of things you could go into in those days. This was in the 30s. So she went to work for Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner, and Smith. That was the old name of it, and loved working there. And in the meantime, my father had gone to law school for 1 year and decided to join his brother Ed in Charleston, South Carolina, where he had worked for his uncle and then opened his own store that was eventually a dime store. So this went on they had an on-off relationship for 9 years. My mother lived with a family in Washington. So really, there really was no time that my mother could learn to cook. and she didn't know how to cook. Well, after the 9 years, my father fell down an elevator shaft at Edwards. And in the meantime, he had been quite social. They called him the Duke. But I think his brothers kind of got tired of all that business. Plus, here he was. He broke his shoulder, had a concussion. My Uncle Macy was sent up to get my mother from Washington to come down. And they finally got married about a year later. So I remember my mom saying, I call her Mama because that's what I call her. She said, the first thing I could cook for your father was tuna casserole. He did not like it. So between that and mom not working anymore, she became a wonderful, wonderful housewife or whatever. And she threw herself into learning to cook. Her mother sent her recipes. My grandmother gave her fish recipes. She had lots of friends. When she passed on, I, being the only one in Charleston, I got all the cookbooks, all the recipes. Some of them were just cutouts from newspapers. Some of them she jotted down on the back of a check. Some of them were in shorthand, which of course she knew very well from working. And it was a mishmash. But she ended up being a wonderful cook. My father gave her the best name he ever could have given her. And I heard this a lot because he used to name a lot of women in town this. She was a balabusta. So she earned that name after we were all three born. She threw herself into, my parents were part of the group that started Emmanuel. And she threw herself into Emmanuel, sisterhood, all the Jewish things. She became a wonderful cook. She even made, my grandmother Kronsberg used to make the filter fish, all the fish recipes. One of the favorite recipes was fish cakes, which I'm sure probably started out as crab cakes. Very good. We all went to her house. All the kids went there Friday night for Shabbat. The grandkids ended up going there for Shabbat. And my daughter, who was the only granddaughter, the rest were grandsons, used to go early on Friday afternoons and sit and watch Mama cook, write down recipes, which thank God she did because some of the ones that, are a little mishmashy, she wrote down and we still have them in the family. So,
Nikki,
that's about it.
can I ask you a question? Do you think that she would have considered herself, I hear that she became a good balabusta, but do you think she would have considered herself a Southern cook with good Southern
She was
recipes?
definitely, everything we had was Southern. Actually, and of course, as everyone else, we had a housekeeper. And on Sunday, this was something else. My father insisted she cook all his meals. So 6 days a week, my mother cooked 3 times for him. On Sunday after Sunday school, my nursey would come in, cook fried chicken, wonderful biscuits, okra, all the Southern food. But Mama, I forgot to say also that my grandmother from Stanton, from Germany, cooked very heavy German food. And the recipe she sent, one of them was called chicken gumbo. This chicken gumbo is not gumbo as you think, but don't forget Stanton, Virginia was pretty Southern too. But anyway, she sent her it. I still have a copy of it, handwritten by my grandmother, to my mom. And that was the favorite recipe of all the kids. It was a special night when Mama made chicken gumbo. And that's the recipe that's in here.
I have made the recipe.
And
Actually,
Rachel,
I made it.
she did. It was right before the book went to the publisher. And she said, "Oh, I made that chicken gumbo." I think she was testing. to see if it was really good. But and the thing about that recipe is you can doctor it up any way you want. You can put okra in it to make it more like more southern. There's so much you can do, right? You can
It's a lot you could do. It's a delicious recipe, but I did make some adjustments. Sorry.
She was testing me.
I was testing it. But that's the thing about cooking.
Pretty much covers it.
Becky?
I do want to say one thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Those of you, and I think some of you are not from Charleston. I don't recognize you because I grew up here, but I want you to know this is a great cookbook, even if you're not from the South. The stories, I've read it through twice. I love the stories. I love them. And those of you who are, you will get feelings of growing up here and all the small little towns that these people grew up in. And you'll feel something like from childhood.
Thank you for saying that, because, you know, part of why once we wrote the book, we realized there was this kind of collective thread of stories that we all felt, that kind of collective unconscious of Judaism, whether you were from Spartanburg or whether you moved, you know, down from Greenville from somewhere. And, you know, Jews across the, I think, diaspora have that same feeling. When you sit down at the table, it brings up those memories. I mean, anybody, when they sit down at the table, it brings up wonderful memories of the people that were there, the smells, the visceral type of things that you remember. And so, you know, this book is written to preserve those memories, to preserve those recipes. And also, what we wanted to point out, if you'll look at that picture, we loved your story, but we also asked her for a picture. And we also, one of the other agendas was to honor the women who were in our grandparents' and parents' kitchen, and the African Americans who helped and learned kosher, being quite something that took on that. And they were kind of invisible. And if you look at the picture in Mickey's story, you'll see they were present but not visible. So we really wanted to honor and show gratitude. And what was your nurse's name? Mary, right. So, and they all had names and lives and were wonderful people that came into our lives, and they were really a large part, we think, of the Jewish Southern Table. Did we want to ask questions, or you have anything else you want to?
Ashley, where's Ashley? Ashley, you have questions? Or what we want to do, we did this in Spartanburg last week. This is a bigger crowd, but you know, people, you can ask questions, but we also had people who made some comments, some interesting comments about their own experiences. And I think having that conversation, if you will, is quite interesting.
And I mean, we don't have to say what's your favorite Jewish food memory. You have one. Raise your hand. There we go.
Yeah, we're not from here. We're from
Okay, 1 second. We'll pass the mic around so people on Zoom can hear us.
How many of you are from Charleston originally in the room?
Or South Carolina, or the
Or South Carolina, yeah. Okay, and how many, raise your hand, are not originally from South Carolina? Okay, this is a primer. South Carolina.
Actually, you know what? These stories will resonate. It doesn't matter where you're from.
Yeah, it's across the diaspora.
It's stories of family and food and tradition, and you are going to relate. So it's interesting. We have heard that, and you know, quite frankly, we've heard it from folks who are not Jewish. They also recognize in family stories. So
we're from Minnesota. And my question is, in that cookbook, I'm an Ashkenazi Jew, but I love Sephardic food too. It's healthier, obviously. Does the book include Sephardic recipes, or is Charleston, South Carolina, primarily Ashkenazi?
The book, actually, the first chapter is called The Journey, and we do have a fabulous story from Anita Moes Rosenberg. Many of you know Anita. She knows her family history very well. We were very fortunate. She allowed me to get my hands on the Moes family cookbooks. There's two. I had 2 hours with those cookbooks to go get copies. And we do have some recipes from Sephardic, not as many as we would like, obviously. It centers a lot on Ashkenazi. The book actually is really early 20th century, very late 19th century. We don't go way back. This is our grandparents and our great-grandparents' generation that we're writing about. Although, let me tell you, the last chapter is called The Legacy, and this is probably my favorite. We asked young women, could have been men too, but we asked young women, Lisa's daughter, my daughter, quite a few others, to write their own memories of food.
Robert Rosen's daughter.
Yeah, Allie Rosen. Obviously, they're already how many generations into this, right? So is it holding? What's getting carried forward? And it was wonderful. I mean, they all wrote to a T. They all wrote about food as love. This is how my grandmother, my bubby, my mother, they show love, and they all have very strong memories, and they're all carrying it forward in their own way. My daughter is pescatarian. She doesn't eat meat. That was fine. No brisket on her table. But, you know, she's carrying it forward in her own way. Allie Rosen is a fabulous writer, cookbook author in her own right in New York. And Allie sent us a fabulous recipe. It's a lots grits recipe. One question we had from folks is, so Southern Jewish means you're mashing those two together? And we said, no. It's not a mashup. It's, you know, this is different. Although the lots grits casserole. But it really was exciting for Lisa and myself to get those stories to see that it's going to carry forward.
What's your name?
Mark.
Mark.
Robin's last name.
Okay. So I'm not sure if you know of Charleston's history, but the very first Jews to come to Charleston, South Carolina, were Sephardic. They settled here, and there were more Jews in Charleston at one point than in New York, and they were Sephardic Jews. The Ashkenazi were the landsmen, right? They came later. So, yeah, it's a rich history. And they brought very special different recipes because they came from the Caribbean, no? And they used spices differently. We had a whole podcast about that. And they brought different flavors. And so we're very lucky, I think, to have a little smidgen of that. Now in Charleston, I still think it's Ashkenazi based, but I do think there's an undercurrent of those, and I think it's coming back too. We have an Israeli story, and we also have people that are not Jewish who have contributed, who have Jewish connections, and who are deeply rooted in the South, and their connections are deep. Judge Casey Manning wrote us a story about Dylan and that part of South Carolina, and so he has a story.
I'm originally a Yankee from Philadelphia, and to me, Jewish food that I most loved were latkes. I haven't heard you mention latkes. Is that part of Southern Jewish food too?
Sure, we have latkes in the book, absolutely.
So you'll like this. Who has a cast iron skillet? They make the best latkes. So Northerners, I don't think, cook with cast iron skillets, but that is something of throw over. I think not maybe from African American, but also from our Southern neighbors, and they grew up with cast iron skillets, and they make wonderful latkes because they hold that grease. And do we have that picture in this book? I don't think so. No. My daughter, her Machatanam is from Natural Bridge, Virginia, and she, Joanna Watts, made, absolutely fabulous latkes. She's not Jewish, in her cast iron skillet. Yeah, we have a couple recipes.
I'll use my teacher voice. Just an anecdote. My grandmother didn't read or write. My mother wanted to get her recipes. Well, how much of this? How much? You should have known this. You should
In the historical sense, because we do think this is a history or a little bit of an anthropology, food anthropology. We had to get those measurements down right for the cookbook part before USC Press, for University of South Carolina Press. So in a historical sense, we do keep some of those historical recipes, but we really had to interpret what was a little shittle of this and a little shittle of that.
So something you said rang true when you opened your conversation. I'm from Spring Valley, New York. And when we said we were moving down here, our children said, "You're moving where? Do they have Jews there? I didn't even know they had people there. Don't we just retire to Florida?" No, we like Charleston and we found the Jewish community, so. Yeah.
We were in Greenville last week, and I was surprised at how many, we had a nice crowd, how many people were not from Greenville. They were all from other places as well. They're retirees up there. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, yeah, I can hear it. I grew up in New Orleans. So I have a question, just one question. Back in the early 70s, and I grew up, I'm way older than that, okay, but let's say because two women, and I'm trying desperately, and I think her name was Sylvia Gerson. I don't know if these names are familiar. And another woman wrote two Jewish, one I can remember was the Kosher Creole Cookbook. Okay, and there was a second one. And I was just wondering if you all were familiar with that. Sylvia was a friend of my mother's, and so it wasn't a small Jewish community. There were about 10,000 people there in the 50s. There were about 10,000 people there.
I do have that.
But they all kind of knew each other.
Rachel mentioned Marcy Cohn Ferris, and she wrote this amazing foreword. If you don't read any of the stories and just read the foreword, you've done your homework. But Marcy, her first book, or one of her first books, I think it was her first book, was Matzo Ball Gumbo. I think you might be thinking of that. And that was the beginnings of that food genre and studying food and where it comes from and how it was. We just kind of took off. We, were new to this world in some ways. And she's been a wonderful mentor and just wrote a book called Edible North Carolina.
Yeah, we're from New York. And I think what's interesting is the commonality, what's so common to Jewish life all over. Now, I have to admit, there's a bit of northern elitism or arrogance, but when you said balabusta, machatanim, I said, you guys know those words, But then when you start telling stories about families and get-togethers, it's the same stuff. It's the exact same stuff we had. It's a nice feeling. It's a nice feeling for us because we're kind of newbies down here, but it's like, we can embrace that too. So.
I think the thread in the book, the beautiful thread in the book are through the stories, and that our contributors wrote in their own voice. And they're all and their voices are similar. Their voices, even their different experiences, but were similar feelings. And I think that's, it's a good feeling, right? When you find familiar or home, it feels like home. When you read these stories, it's like home. Whether it doesn't matter where you're from.
Hi, I'm from Baltimore originally, but I was living in Indianapolis, and I was getting Hadassah magazine. And there was a story, The Jews of the South. And I said, oh my goodness, where are they? And it talked about Charleston and Savannah. So we came down here. Turns out that Ellen Katzman, who was the Federation president, I worked with her in Indianapolis. And I said, oh, Ellen, she says, you have to move here. So we visited here and we went to Savannah. And we liked Savannah too, but we loved Charleston. And one reason we loved it is because we came here. It just so happened that when we were visiting, Ellen said, go to the College of Charleston on Sunday and listen to the lecture. And I'm just adding that because there's so many people who've said, we're from the north, although Baltimore is not considered north. No.
Here we are.
My grandmother's from Baltimore. There are a lot of connections between South Carolina and Baltimore. And I have decided one thing from doing research with the Jewish Merchant Project, which, by the way, if you don't know what that is, somebody's nodding, they know it is. There was Baltimore Bargain House or Bargain Store. Anyway, they gave credit to a lot of the merchants down here, these small town, these little stores. Every little town in South Carolina had Jewish stores. And my grandmother's from there. And I was always trying to figure out how my grandmother met my grandfather, who was a Russian immigrant, and ended up in Somerton, South Carolina from Baltimore. But then I found that story repeated in a few other places. So I think the Baltimore connection might have provided more than goods for their stores. I think they also might have been making, just some shit talks and introducing people because, we've got a lot of back and forth there with Baltimore. So welcome. You belong here.
I do. Well, I've been here since 2005. So
Mahjong with Brenda. I'm sorry.
Linda, Terry.
Terry. I'm sorry, Terry.
Yeah.
Yesterday. So we did.
Yeah, I feel like I lived here all my life.
Really? That's.
I want to just say two things. Filibuster is probably the only Yiddish word I know. I have no other Yiddish words. My parents didn't speak Yiddish to each other or at all, except for I guess my dad picked it up from his parents. And the second thing is when I got engaged to my husband, who is from New York, his whole family said, she's from South Carolina. Jewish?
We'd love to hear some more stories, but I'm going to maybe, what time is it actually? Close?
We've got about 10 more minutes.
Okay. I'm going to just share for y'all just one story that might feel a little different or maybe the same. And it's from Retta Mendelson. Is Retta here? No, right. And this is just kind of wraps up the Southern Jewish experience. So Retta is from Orangeburg, and she wrote the story with her sister Carol Aronson Kelly. Truly, we ate like our Southern neighbors, but with a few notable exceptions. Granny and Mother did not cook with the bacon grease or store it in a special little can on top of the stove. They always used Fleischmann's margarine. And the menus included things our neighbors knew nothing about. Chopped liver, herring, blintzes, bagels, lox, brisket, potato, and noodle kugel, matzo balls, matzo brie, and more. So when we went to the beach every summer, we took along fried chicken, barbecue, and deviled eggs, as well as chopped liver, herring, brisket. So I think that just is how we're the same but different. We ate like our Southern neighbors, so that we were a little bit, growing up. It probably did feel the same but different. So.
Hi, I'm Amy Lamparello, and I'm thoroughly enjoying your talk. I wanted to mention that I had the good fortune of living in the southernmost part of the United States in Honolulu, and one of the best cookbooks that I have and that I've bought for many friends is a Passover cookbook. I believe the name is When You Live in Hawaii, You Get Very Creative During Passover. And it was in the 90s when I lived there, so it was before the internet really took off. And the recipes in there are wonderful, and they have a lot of Hawaiian influence to them. So cookbooks really, I think they really mesh together the cultures that you're part of and how you adapt to the environment, that you're living in.
I love that. We're getting ready to go to Atlanta, and they're having a cookbook exchange at the Jewish table at, I think it's Shereth Israel congregation. And I'm really excited to see you know, if there are books like that, you know, Jewish, and Max, who is the, yeah, he's the, Max, stand up for a second. Introduce, introduce yourself. Yeah.
I'm the public historian and Jewish Heritage Collection coordinator here. So I work at Jewish Studies. I also work at the library with the Jewish Archives and work at the Historical Society.
He's also interested in foodways. And that's, tell us, you have an article?
Yeah, an article coming about Sephardic cookbooks in the U.S. And so very much the same things come up. About family, about memory, about adapting it to American standards, about the emotions that go into it, about transition from oral recipes to written recipes. And Sephardic cookbooks add this extra dimension about this exoticization of Sephardic food, and things like that.
There's a connection for you, Mark. Right. So I brought a couple of cookbooks, just community cookbooks from Columbia and Spartanburg, to give to Max. He didn't know he was collecting, but at the College of Charleston, is that exhibit still up? What's the name of the exhibit? Cornbread and challah. Anyway, I brought him a few, like the stuffed bagel from the Columbia Hadassah chapter, and the Spartanburg cookbook. I thought it was kind of interesting to archive community cookbooks.
If you get a chance, the exhibit's really good. It's on the third floor outside of Special Collections, and they've taken several cases. They've done a very nice job with the exhibit. We really appreciate it. I want to recognize Laura Moses, who came in. Hey, Laura. Laura's on our board. She's one of our officers now, and she has a fabulous story in the book. The Moses family, long time, way back to the beginning of time in Sumter, South Carolina. Laura, I'm so nice for you to join us today. Great story, also. There's a good biscuit recipe and scones.
They're from her father, Robert Moses, who was, some of you might have known. So here's what we like to say. Savor your story. Share your story. Write down your story or your recipe and pass it along. Give it to somebody. Let me see. There's the one.
You should all do this because we had a heck of a time with all the children trying to figure out some of it.
People always ask us, what do we hope this will do? Well, we hope it brings up conversation with families and that you end up with your own cookbook, or at least writing those recipes down or passing them along.
Thank y'all so much.
Thank you. You've been a great audience.
Okay.
I just, when you ask about Sephardic, I grew up in Israel, Ashkenazi, and I have never been introduced to okra until I started dating a Moroccan guy. And then I had a friend from Iraq, so Israeli, obviously, Jewish. And so okra is very Sephardic food in Israel.
My son was in Israel. Now he won't eat hummus in the U.S. because it was so fantastic in Israel.
We had a young lady come and interview us for a podcast from the Jewish Women's Alliance Archives, Jewish Women's Archive, and she spent the weekend with us. So the first thing I did was cook okra gumbo. She'd never seen it before. You know, cooking okra is something, but it's really a very special vegetable. And I'm not sure if the roots are Mediterranean or African, but I thought they might have been African. Ashley, we have something for you. Thank you so much.